this idealization of flexibility. The more flexible you are, the better off you are. And there's this conflation of spiritual enlightenment with this flexibility. There is still that feeling. I get that sense from a lot of students that, oh, if only I could do this pose, or I really want to do this pose. And I think people get lost in what that means.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Szabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Sivana podcast. I'm excited for our show today. Our guest is Ariana Rabinovitch. She is a yoga teacher and movement specialist and an author, and she's here to talk to us today about some of the myths in yoga, as well as an exciting research project that she's doing. Ariana, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So how did you get involved with yoga?
How did I get involved with yoga? Well, it goes back to when I was in high school, before yoga was even cool. Before it was mainstream. I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and it was an awkward stage, 11th grade, and I had just moved there, actually. And my mom had some Raquel Welch books lying around. So I guess that was one of my first introductions. She had like a Bikram style yoga book. And then my mom went to Kripalu for a weekend and came back with a recording of her sessions with Amrit Desai. And so we had a cassette player.
Awesome. For the listeners right now being like, what's a cassette player?
Yeah, and I popped it in. I was spending time alone in the living room, tried it out, and it was just like this instant aha. I loved it. I think it helped me with that awkward stage, and it was something physical that I could do, and I was immediately good at it, whatever that means. And it helped me a lot. And ever since then, I've been exploring it. And I was thinking about that time recently, and there weren't any yoga classes really in Pittsburgh at that time, except for this one man. I wish I could remember his name. He lived on a farm. He had a barn, and he advertised weekly yoga classes in this barn. It was upstairs. It was very sketchy. I had to climb a ladder to get up to this upper deck level. This floor was carpeted, and there were about 15 other people doing the yoga classes. And it was just this wild experience. And looking back, I'm surprised my mom let me go.
Some random guy's barn out in the woods.
Yeah. But I guess that's technically my first group class.
Wonderful.
Other than that, yeah.
Well, and you obviously survived and were unscathed, so that's exciting.
No, it was fine. There was nothing sketchy going on. Nothing at all.
Yeah. So tell me about your approach to yoga. I know you're not only a yoga teacher, but you're a teacher of teachers. And it's something that I think you and I both are very committed to is raising the bar for yoga teachers more in terms of our education. But tell me about your specific approach to yoga.
My approach to yoga, well, it's always evolving. And I think that it has evolved a lot over the years. But right now, my approach to yoga is, my personal practice is to always find my center, something very simple, and to build resiliency. That's something that can be metaphorical, resiliency of body, mind, and soul. And that carries over into how I work with my students. I'm all about resiliency, if I could find one word. And I think awareness has always also been part of my approach to yoga. Just coming back to your center, knowing what your center is, or be willing to explore what that is, and to take time to be aware.
And how do you define resiliency in the context of not only perhaps a physical yoga practice, but as that expands out into our lives?
So not only the physical practice. Well, it's strength also. It's the capacity to handle things in your life with grace, with integrity, with honesty. And in terms of the body, I know you asked about beyond the body, but it's about building strength, not just flexibility. And mentally, I guess I think we're living in some trying times right now.
Indeed.
I don't know I assume that a lot of yoga listeners would have leaned a specific way with the election. But you never know. But I think this is a time for some resiliency. Mm-hmm. Also.
Well, and as you're speaking, I kind of think of the concept of stress in our culture and how it's kind of thrown around like a bad word, like, oh, we're overstressed. And I mean, absolutely, we are culturally. But also there's this other side to stress, which makes me think of the resiliency conversation where it's like, okay, deliberately stressing your body in particular ways so that you can build up a tolerance and resiliency to it. How do you feel like stress, and I don't mean like, stress from electoral concerns or things like that, which obviously is a big part of stress, but in the sense of a practice, how do you feel about stress within the practice in that context of like how we are challenging our bodies to put them under stress so that they can not only be more flexible, but as you said, be strong as well and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And absolutely, we need stress. There is this term eustress, eustress, which is good stress. We need that. We can't live in a bubble where we don't need to tolerate certain things. And stress is another term for load in biomechanics. And we need those loads. We need to be able to withstand them. And it's a part of life in many ways. Yeah.
So the next thing I kind of want to dive in, and they do tie together. I want to talk about the research project that you're doing because I think it's awesome, but also ties into this concept of your book and exposing yoga myths, the one that you co-authored. And there's a lot of foo-foo, wishy-washy kind of stuff in yoga. And I do admittingly, like, I fall more towards the kind of rational, grounded side, but I also have appreciation for some of the things that we can't really explain just yet. I've been witness to, both in myself and also others, of things that I can't explain myself, I can't explain with science can't explain. But to me, that doesn't mean, okay, we just blindly believe it and throw out science then. I still think we really need to, where we can, root ourselves in empirical evidence, things that we can reproduce, things that we can show and demonstrate again, and not just be like, well, because the guru said so, or because this is the way it's done. It's like, that's not good enough for me. Like, we need to go a little deeper. So let's start perhaps with just, what do you think are the biggest kind of myths and things that are problematic within how yoga is being practiced and expressed in the Western world today?
Well, first, I just want to say you're speaking my language with the, there is a lot of flowery language in yoga, and there is a precedence for following ideas just because our teachers taught them to us or the guru said so. And I love applying empirical data and analysis to this process as well. So you're speaking my language. But the most, gosh, that's hard. The most prevalent myth you're asking me?
Sure. Or just what do you find in your day-to-day working with students, working with teachers that comes across as not only perhaps the most commonly repeated one, but one that's actually problematic in terms of if we want yoga to really grow and expand in a healthy and productive way as it evolves here in the West?
I think for what I see with my students, it's this this idealization of flexibility, as it's something, the more flexible you are, the better off you are. And there's this conflation of spiritual enlightenment with this flexibility. And that's something that I've heard Matthew Remski talk about very eloquently, that he would watch his teachers and watch them do these exquisite, intricate poses and think, well, gosh, they must be spiritually free. And I want that for myself.
They can do the full splits. They must be enlightened.
Yeah, they must be enlightened. And I'm sure I was guilty, or I'm sure I did that also. And I think there is still that feeling. I get that sense from a lot of students that, if only I could do this pose, or I really want to do this pose. And I think people get lost in what that means. So I think overemphasis on flexibility and idealizing that with students. And then, so I try to encourage students, not to, quote, go to their edge and to, especially with my hypermobile students, to back off from those edges and to build some resiliency instead of just going for flexibility. And then with teachers, in terms of what we say, I think one of the biggest things that I still hear is that yoga is all you need. That yoga is this panacea. It's this perfect physical practice that strengthens and stretches the body, and you don't need anything else. And I believed that for a while. And then, there was a period of time where that was all that I was doing. And that's when I got injured. And it's not, it wasn't until I started adding stress loads and doing some strength training that I got better. So I still do the yoga, but the strength training is imperative as well.
I kind of tongue-in-cheek make up a silly example that to that same light, where people are walking out of their yoga class in the winter and the wind blows off their Lululemon hat, and they run after it, but they run out of breath because they're not doing any cardio. All they do is yoga, and then they pop out their SI joint because they're running after it, and they've got no stability in their hips at all. So it's like that very much talking to the point of like people think, I just do my yoga, and that's not enough. Even, and especially in the way that it's often practiced, where, again, often flexibility is the goal. The number one reason why people come to yoga in the United States is flexibility, and they come with the assumption that more is better, and they come out with a workout mentality. If I do more, I'll get more. So if I get further in this posture, I'm gonna get this elusive flexibility thing, which we know is actually not the case. That's not the way that the body works, because our range is so much governed by our nervous system and other things. So it's challenging trying to communicate to people like, hey, you don't need to be constantly trying to mash yourself past your edge. Or this brings up something that you wrote in an article a while back that I really appreciate, because I think the standards for yoga teachers are extremely low. I have over 1,000 hours of massage training, over 1,000 hours of yoga training, and it comes up the idea of, your esthetician needs 1,000 hours to like pop a zit on your face. Yet, not only are yoga teachers expected to know nutrition, life, psychology, all this sort of stuff, which is not accurate at all, but there's still that weird expectation. But specifically, adjustments. So many of the injuries of yoga happen with adjustments. And to me, that a teacher who walks out of a 200-hour training that maybe had a weekend workshop in adjustments is qualified to be not only putting their hands on people, which brings up trauma and all kinds of other possible conversations, which needs additional training, but that they're trying to force people deeper into postures, thinking that it's better to get there. And that to me is absolutely mind-blowing. What do you see with that in the context of teachers adjusting people?
Yeah, that's an important one for me. I'm just curious, which article are you referring to?
There was a Mind, Body, Green article of yours that I had read.
Yeah, that one was, they changed a lot of my language in that. It was a little bit sensationalized, but I think the overall message was still good. But yeah, the adjustments is a big, big deal for me. in my first training, we learned some adjustments, and we're expected to just go out and give them to people. And I don't think we should be. Because it is always, as you said, with this idea of pushing people further into the posture. And we know that that's not always a good thing. It's probably better for them to find it on their own if they are going to, quote, go further. But where do you live? You're in...
I live in Northern California now, but the previous 4.5 years we were in San Diego.
Okay, so I don't know what the regulations are there, but I'm in New York, and personal trainers are not allowed to touch their clients, to push them or to manipulate them. And massage therapists have to have, I think, 2,000 hours of training in order to be licensed to touch people. And sometimes in yoga teacher trainings, there are massage techniques that are taught, and I don't think we have any business doing that, really. And as you said, the trauma can be a point for people that you don't know how people react to the touch.
Or could you say that there's a place for it, but we need the training for it? Like if a massage therapist is getting 2,000 hours and a yoga teacher is getting 200 hours and their scope is so much broader, like we need to be educating teachers so much more.
We do need to be educating them so much more. But I think, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying, that yoga teachers are expected to know psychology and all this stuff. And so, okay, also we have to know how to touch people. We also have to know how to manipulate. I don't think so. I think that we can't be everything. We can't be all of those things and wear all of those hats. So if you are a yoga teacher and you do want to be hands-on, take the time to get credibility for that, to be qualified to do that. I don't. That's not something that I'm interested in. So I do not touch people generally, except maybe to give some guidance, but it's never to push them further. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think we have to take the time to get qualified to be able to do that. And perhaps teacher training programs should back off on teaching many of those adjustments. And I happen to be releasing a podcast about hot yoga, a study that was done about Bikram yoga in particular. And I was looking for some pictures of, of Bikram yoga, and I found one of Bikram standing on top of a student.
I've seen that.
Yeah. He's
like dancing on top of them.
Yeah. It's hard to look at, but I'm sure. I hope he's not teaching that adjustment to any of his teachers. But I think that's an extreme. But it gets the point across that we should just not be pushing people like that.
Mm-hmm. We'll dive into one more myth, perhaps, because hot yoga. It's cold where I'm at right now, and it's wintertime in North America.
What's cold for you? I'm curious.
Well, 9 months ago, 60 degrees would have been cold. Right now, our high today, I think, is like 46. So it's legit cold. But I was where was I? I was in Milwaukee a couple weeks ago teaching, and I saw one of my students from San Diego. He was out there because his daughter was doing a fencing tournament, and I was wearing a t-shirt and sweats and like the whatever 45 degree weather it was there, and he was like bundled up in all this stuff. He's like, "What's happened to you? You've changed so much." Because I would have been there right with him a few months earlier, like, "Oh my gosh, it's freezing. How do people live in this?" But now it's the body gets resiliency.
Yes,
it adapts.
You've built up your tolerance.
Indeed, absolutely. I've been outside chopping wood, so it helps build it up. But the point, how do you feel about the claims of hot yoga detoxifying the body? We can set aside the conversation of do you enjoy hot yoga or any of that sort of stuff, because I think that's fine. But the claim that is most often attached to it is that you're sweating out all your toxins, and this is something again that when we see something so repeated so often, it's like, okay, show me the money. Show me the data that actually shows that. And can we? Is there any data that says anything to that sort whatsoever?
No, there is no data about that. No, we know that sweating, although it feels like you are emitting every possible toxin that you've ever ingested in your life, it does not that's not what's coming out. You're losing water, you're losing a little bit of salt, and you're losing some potassium, and that's it. And, yes, it drives me crazy that is the number one claim with hot yoga, that you're detoxifying. I think another one I've read is that you're burning more fat because you're in, such a heated environment. And if that was the case, then people who live in extremely hot temperatures with high humidity, they would all be, they would have no weight problems. Everyone would be very, very thin. So, or have, a low BMI. And it's just not the case. So no, there's no data to support that claim, but yes, it's everywhere still. And it gets under my skin. And I think it's just about how people feel. That's what they think is happening. And so it's the psychology behind it. And so it's very easy to feed into that idea with marketing. But something new that I saw recently is that hot, heated environments are now it's being carried over into other forms of exercise. So I read about a kettlebell workout in a heated room. Like the last thing you want is to be carrying a heavy, weight and have sweat dripping off of you. It just sounds like a liability waiting to happen. Another one is a spinning class in a heated room.
Jeez. It's funny because I lived in Thailand for a number of years, and it was like the thought is when it gets really hot, you stop doing everything. You don't like, oh yeah, it's 12 noon. Let's go do yoga right now. It's like, no. Can we do it in the morning or in the nighttime when it's not so oppressively hot? Yet here I come back to the United States and everyone's like, woohoo, hot yoga. Let's get in 108 degrees. And it's like, wow. Okay. I mean, full disclosure, I do appreciate every now and then a hot yoga class. Like it feels nice on my body. I enjoy it. So I'm not knocking the hot yoga, but I do appreciate authentic claims if they're going to be made. And with something like the detoxifying, if we have evidence that says that does not happen, then we need to stop making that claim as a community, which I think is important. Now, this kind of tailors us into or leads us into the conversation, which originally I reached out for you to want to talk about because I think it's really exciting. You're doing the Yoga and Movement Research Project, YMR. Tell us about that.
Okay, so it's the Yoga and Movement Research Project. We're in the process of building it right now. I'm working with Jules Mitchell, Jen Pilati, and Catherine Cowie. I met them when I went to a lecture with Greg Lehman out in California last May. And I think it was May. I have a terrible sense of time. But we would sit around and just have these amazing discussions, and they all blew my mind with the amount of data and information that they have at their fingertips and the time that they spend reading research. And it became clear to me at that time that I love research and like I really want to get better at reading it, and I want to have more access to it. And I think that, when people say, well, studies show, or the research says, it has a lot of weight to it. And it's been interesting to me to see how those studies or the information from particular studies gets sensationalized, gets misused. And there's one study in mind that comes to mind about that, with which I haven't released the podcast yet, but it's about osteoporosis and yoga. There was a New York Times article that basically took the information in the paper and made some claims that are far-reaching. That when you read the paper, the data does not show that. So I think that that's a problem for us. We, as yoga teachers, we want to know what the research says. Maybe we don't know how to find it. That was part of my journey also. I was like, where do you look? Where do you begin to look? So if you go on pubmed.com and you just look for yoga research, it's overwhelming how many articles are in there. And how do you know which ones are good? Let's say you can find some of them. I think yoga teachers would have a hard time understanding them because the language is so academic and scientific, and it's really hard to make sense of it all. And then how do you apply it to your teaching? I mean, oh my gosh, that's overwhelming to be able to do that. But that process is fascinating to me, and I'm in it. Like I want to keep reading this research. And the way that I look at it is that all of these studies give us a tiny bit of information. And so it's like you're looking at this giant puzzle, and each study gives you maybe not even a whole piece of that puzzle, but just a fraction of it. And then you have to kind of put it all together and make some sense out of it. And that's really hard because a lot of the research contradicts other
Well, that was one point that I did want to make of the challenge in that, and Jules talks about this all the time. She's like, cool, look at this article that shows that, this thing happens when you do this. And, oh, look, here's another research paper that says that it doesn't do that. So it's like, One of the things that you guys are doing with the project, which I really commend and appreciate, is the simplification, or for lack of a better term, maybe I'm making up this word, the understandability of this type of stuff, where taking these things where the average yoga teacher or yoga student would read one of these papers and be like, this might as well be in Latin because I don't understand it. And you guys are taking that information and you're making it accessible to people, which I think is really, really important.
Yeah, that's our goal. We're trying to put it into simple terms. Even though I do advocate for teachers to take the time to learn the language of the body. I know not everyone is interested in that or has the time or the finances, but it opens doors for you. To be able to learn this language, it just opens so many other opportunities and ways to learn. But we are trying to make it simple and not only explain what those studies are trying to tell us, but then also to be like, okay, so what does this mean for how we teach? Like, what does this mean for when we're working with our students? What does this mean for our practice? And I think it's hard to do, but that's also what we're aiming to do.
Is the ultimate aim of the project a book or trainings, or like where is this going?
Okay, so right now the first launch of it will be a website where people can subscribe, and with their subscription, they have access to these articles, to our reviews of the research. So they can search by topic. They can look at the latest releases that we're putting out there and see, what information is available about that research. And then eventually, once we have this library in place, we want to create some programming. So I'm not sure if it will be live or just webinars. I'm thinking webinars to start, but that's far off after this launch. We have to get the articles and the information out there first.
Well, and for listeners too, especially yoga teachers out there, that there's so much value in that. I mean, I don't know what you guys are planning on charging for to get in there, but like we talk about Jules a few times, and she'll post all kinds of awesome things, and like half the time they're behind paywalls, and I'm like, no, like I'll click on them, and it's like some like academic thing. I'm like, So, and to have access to all of those, I mean, the amount of money that one would have to spend to get back there. I mean, that's what she does. So she does, but so it's nice to have where it's all in one place. It's all getting explained in a more accessible way. So I think that's really exciting and really needed in our community, both for yoga students, but in particular, I mean, yoga teachers. We need to, in my mind, continue to raise the bar, and until, like you even mentioned, until yoga teachers are taking the time to learn anatomical language, of like just to be able to sit down, and when a student comes in and says, well, I have spinal stenosis, and you're like, okay, namaste, listen to your body. If that's all you got, like we're in trouble. And I mean, I honor and respect that. Like, fine, it's okay if you don't know certain things, but one, say you don't know and be like, what is that? But two, the amount of communication that can occur. This was actually one of my biggest, controversy at the end aside, but my biggest gripes with Anusara Yoga at the time was that they were educating the crap out of all their teachers, which was awesome, but they were teaching them a language that nobody understood except for Anusara teachers. So an Anusara teacher could have 1,000+ hours of training, and they'd walk up to a physical therapist and they would spend all their time like, well, what do you mean by kidney loop? Like, what's inner spiral? Like, huh? versus if they had just taught them anatomical language, now all of a sudden you've got this amazing resource where people can talk and communicate, and where you can have physical therapists saying, I'm seeing this in my injuries in my practice. Hey, this is what I'm seeing as a yoga teacher in my classes. How can we work together with this? And I think that will really grow the practice and how it's expressed. The more teachers can start to do that. So I think your work in that field is awesome, because it helps to bring that for us so much more.
I wanted to touch on something you mentioned before, which was, that the research doesn't always fit together nicely, that sometimes the research rejects the other research. And I think as yoga teachers, it's important for us to, and this is something I'm trying to get comfortable with, to be comfortable with uncertainty. Mm-hmm. We tend to want a yes or no answer. And it's just part of our binary thinking. And I think we need to get away from that to be more effective as teachers, and to be willing to live in that dynamic. I think that's important.
Absolutely. And that's something that's difficult.
So hard.
Douglas Brooks actually talks a lot about that, and that's something that I've appreciated so much from amongst a lot of the stuff that he does, but his work of just bringing in that conversation of being okay with the fact that there's a mystery there, that or a contradiction of something's just not going to make sense to the mind, and yes, continue to strive to understand and to know and realize truth, but I don't care if you spend your entire lifetime trying to know truth, it's the tiniest little drop of this ocean that you can learn in a human lifetime. So there's always going to be this greater mystery, and learning how to not only be comfortable with that, but integrate that experience into our daily lives and into our yoga practice or anything else is critical, because otherwise, what are we going to, we're either going to deny the mystery or only embrace the mystery, which is what you often see, where people say, well, screw science, the climate change is a hoax, or something like that. And so it's all about, the mystical stuff because the guru said so. Or people say, well, if science can't prove it, I don't want anything to do with it, which can also be very harmful, because there are limits to science.
There are.
So I think it's really important to find that middle ground. So I appreciate that's also part of your conversation around all this, which is great.
Yeah, and going back to something we said earlier, there's a lot of flowery language in yoga, a lot of woo-woo. And even though I tend to stay away from that, if there are teachers who, that really resonates with them, continue to use that. But then also maybe take time to balance that out with some of the, the other scientific disciplines or some of the empirical information that we have also. It'll just enrich your teaching. You don't have to reject one versus the other. So
absolutely. So where can people find out more about you, about the research project? You've got a great podcast, which literally is like a who's who of all my favorite anatomy nerds. Like Thomas Myers is on there, Joule is on there, always I'm yeah, Katie Bowman, woohoo. So you got a great podcast, your book, your website. Where can people find out about all this stuff?
So my website is arianayoga.com, and you can find all that stuff, the podcast, the book, and the new YMR project links on there. But if people want to, right now for the Yoga and Movement Research Project, we're just trying to get a sense of who's interested. So we're collecting names and emails for the mailing list so we can let people know as soon as it's done. So if people are interested in that, they should go to YAM Research. It stands for Yoga and Movement Research.com, and they can sign up so that they can find out about it as soon as it's
awesome.
Ready.
And are people going to be able to get involved with this process in other ways, in terms of, you mentioned that there's, a subscription service and get on the site, but can people participate in ways and kind of either adding to or integrating the research? What's the plan on that side? Yeah,
well, I want to find out what topics are interested, what topics people are interested in learning more about. I got a request the other day for some research on yin yoga, which I'm interested in also, but I don't think there is any research. But I want to know what people are interested in. What kind of research studies would they want to read about and learn about? There will also be a forum, a community forum, where teachers can share their experience, their ideas, their questions in order to learn more. And in terms of involvement, that's about it right now with subscribers, but I'm open to ideas.
Great. Well, that's awesome. Well, I hope people will go on and not only, sign up, put their names on the mailing list so they can find out more, but that this conversation continues to grow and because I think it's a really important one. And I appreciate the work you're doing. So thank you so much. And thanks for coming on the show and chatting with us today. I appreciate it. I hope all of our listeners go check out your website, check out your podcast, your book. I actually ordered your book today.
Oh, wow.
So it's coming. I was a little late on going around and getting an order, but I literally have, like, if you go to my Amazon, it's like there are so many books that sit in my shopping cart, then I need to delete them out so they go in that for wait for later, and then I add them back in, but I add new ones in. So I have to temper my book reading addiction. So
what's on the top of your list next?
Oh gosh. Well, the ones that I have to read, actually, I got a new copy, a new translation of the Ramayana. I've got a book on Emperor Julian, who was the last pagan emperor, and he was dealing with, like, how do you deal with a crumbling empire and people with really crazy ideas and things like that. So I thought that one was kind of relevant because he was struggling with some of those things today. And then I got your book coming. I got a few other books on the pipe coming from for potential guests that I'm excited about, that some of them are yoga related. Some of them are a little bit more out there and stuff. So, but those are the two that are sitting on my desk that are saying, read me. But yeah, it's all fun. So if I'm going to have an addiction, that is at least one addiction that I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with that. I can live with that.
That's okay. I have a good friend who says you can always spend money on books or go, find other ways to get them, but never hold back on that because you're feeding your brain. It's important.
Absolutely. Can you give us one book suggestion? One something that you like or you're reading right now?
A book suggestion? Well, oh gosh, my reading right now is kind of limited because I'm studying for a certified strength and conditioning certification. So I'm reading a lot of research from that, but I wouldn't recommend that. Actually, I have a student who wanted to go back to meditation practice. So it's been fun to delve into that. I've been enjoying Thich Nhat Hanh's The Blooming Lotus or The Blooming of a Lotus. But there's some wonderful, simple meditations in there that I'm enjoying going back to. So that'll be my recommendation.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, thank you. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show. For all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed and learned something new, and hope you all have a very present moment. Namaste. Hey everybody, it's Ashton here with an announcement. We're starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Sivana Spirit. If you'd like to enter into the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to sivanaspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, we'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes, left us a review, leave us some comments, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Also want to invite you to go check out Sivana East, which is the name of our blog and also the name of a Facebook group where I interact with guests and our audience. We'll post recent episodes up there as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and or the topics on the shows. And again, thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to sivanaspirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at sivanaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Sivana podcast.